Squeeze it here. Going to change the stream info. Oh, there's a bunch here that's actually already tagged. That's weird.
Yep.
Test. Hi there, folks. I'm Arran Topalian, and welcome back to another episode of Game Design Live. For any newcomers, GDL offers you live interactive design deconstructions of a video game as it's played by a game designer, where we call out cool little design details along the way or chat about the potential reasoning for certain design decisions in a game. So if you're into game design in general or into a certain game and want to understand it better on a design level, this is the place to be. You probably heard, you saw a little bit sort of a peek behind the curtain there of me sort of test driving the sound on the Twitch stream. So yeah, if you turned up early, that was the benefit right there. Also, I would like to take just this moment as a chance to shout out and say thank you to everyone who's followed the channel so far. We're up at 43 followers, which is super appreciated. As I mentioned on my Twitter, when we hit 50 as the main milestone for Twitch followers, I'll be doing a special bonus episode that week on Overwatch. It'll be an hour-long, single-long bonus episode on Overwatch. We'll be breaking down some of the cool design things that Overwatch does to make it the game that it is. But for now, tonight, well, I've got you. We're going to be talking about Hades again. Last time we talked through some interesting stuff to do with the sort of start of the game. That was going from a fresh game. So looking at some of the ways and means the game does what it does near that sort of area, that sort of phase of its lifespan. We're now going to be looking at the end game of Hades. So this is us fast-forwarded all the way to the end of the game. We'll be looking at some of the systems and mechanics that it offers, and sort of talking about the game on more of sort of a high level, and summarizing why perhaps Hades is as highly celebrated critically as it is really. So let's just get started and jump straight into our save file. I would also like to thank my partner for the fact that I'm hijacking their save. I promise not to ruin it too much. Cool. Just go a little bit further forward and sort this. Cool, yeah, so after the first completion of the game, when you finally beat Hades, I would like to say as well that there are going to be a couple of spoilers in this video. We did try our best to avoid spoilers in the first part of this series on Hades. There are going to be, as you'd expect, a few more spoilers in this part, mainly because we're now at the end phase of the game. So if you're not into spoilers for Hades, then this is probably the time to jump out. But if you don't mind, then please do stick around and we'll be talking about some different bits and pieces. So after you beat Hades for the first time, Hades for the first time, you've then completed the challenge to get out of the underworld. And the challenge then becomes to get back to your mother. So the premise then shifts. So you realize that your mother is still alive, she's still out there, and the premise is to get back to her because you can only survive in the underworld for so long before you end up being dragged back into it anyway. But you want to speak to her for longer to find out more about her story and what happened. So the narrative goal becomes get back to your mum. And just straight off the bat, from a narrative perspective, that's an extremely strong motivator to play. That really tugs on the heartstrings. It's not some sort of abstract or contrived premise that's just plucked out of thin air, that relies on you caring about something that the game has introduced throughout its narrative. It offers what's called a mental model Obviously there are people who maybe don't have that kind of. Different people go through different experiences, but it's something we can all sort of relate to is the concept and understand the concept of a mother and the bond to a mother. So it's something the game offers as a way to sort of propel players to keep playing. But Hades does a whole bunch of other things to reinforce that behavior, right? To keep players playing, because in a roguelite by its very nature as a genre taps into something called loss aversion. So obviously in a roguelite, the very nature of a roguelite involves players dying repeatedly over and over again and having their progress reset. And as you might expect, that in and of itself can be quite a difficult thing for a player to swallow, because it taps into, like I say, loss aversion. And loss aversion is to do with, as a human being, our reluctance to, lose things. On a psychological level, loss is 2 times more intense, on average 2 times more intense than the experience of gaining something. So it's something we tend to avoid. So a roguelite taps into this very hard, and Supergiant went to a great length to offer players different ways of means of progressing, so that even though they die and they lose all their progress in a run, there's lots of different things that are progressing forward and aren't being lost, and that really begins to kind of come to the forefront when you reach the later stages of the game. So we're here now in the sort of loading bay, I guess you'd call it, of Hades, where you get to pick your weapon and you get to pick your keepsakes just before you head out to do a dungeon run. And there are a couple of things we're going to call out here. Beforehand, I think there's sort of several key areas that Hades really excels in and are probably worth looking at if you're ever interested in doing a similar game, or just interested in game design and want to see kind of a masterclass and some really smart ways to keep players engaged. So we're going to talk through those at a very high level, and then we're going to go into those in a bit more detail by just walking around the world and looking at them in a bit more detail. The first one is the slow burn investment in its characters. So throughout the world in Hades, there are these different characters that you can meet, as well as the gods that you'll encounter who offer you boons. So for example, we've got this guy here, Skelly, I think his name is. It definitely is his name. I don't know why I'm pretending not to know. You know that I know. But obviously you've got all these different characters in the main house as well.
What might I do for you, my friend?
So you've got Hades himself, obviously, you've got Cerberus, and each of these characters... Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Each of these characters offers progression in and of themselves. So they all offer this sort of heart system, which if you've played games like Stardew Valley, you might be familiar with, where... I don't know why he keeps talking. If you keep gifting these characters, which is called... Oh, right, he's talking to these little characters here. There's a queue, that's why he keeps interrupting me. So every time you offer a character, an NPC in the world nectar, you advance these little hearts forward by 1 heart. What's interesting to note, if you look at this little progression bar here for a second, is the fact that... Okay, we're looking at Persephone now, which is Hades' mother. Sorry, not Hades' mother. Zagreus' mother, Hades' wife. So the first heart has a little bow on it, which signifies that you get something in return for gifting that NPC. That in of itself is an interesting call out. The fact that you're given a reward for the first interaction does a couple of things. First of all, it encourages players to interact with that mechanic. So if there was no reward there, for example, players might just not bother at all. And it's important to kind of offer that sort of first hit for free, in a sense, because it kind of encourages players to get involved with that part of the game. But also it stands a better chance of players just being introduced to the character and potentially forging a bond with that character on an emotional level, not necessarily on a gameplay level where they're expecting something in return. But at the very least, it stands a better chance of doing that. But what's also interesting is you can see the hearts after the initial couple are sort of clumped together. So what the game is essentially doing is obfuscating if there are any more rewards to be earned from that character, and also when you're going to get that reward. And just to say, not all characters do offer you extra rewards as you progress their relationship. So what that basically means is that the only way to find out is to engage. If you knew, for example, when the rewards were going to be given, you would have a very clear understanding of if and when you wanted to stop interacting with that character, or even more so, which characters you didn't want to interact with, because the optimal solution It's just to interact with the characters that give you the rewards because you can see when you get them. So there's some very clear, clever design choices here to sort of, again, encourage players to interact with these characters over time. So in the tweet that we posted earlier for GDL, where we posed the question, what does Maslow's hierarchy of needs have in common with Hades? For anyone who isn't familiar with it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is essentially a motivational theory in psychology. I'm going to go away from Hades for a second because I can't deal with this. Let's just go over here. We go into our room. Screw Dad. So yeah, the hierarchy of needs is a motivational theory in psychology that comprises a 5-level structure or model of sorts of human needs, which is often depicted as kind of like a pyramid. And it goes up in different levels. So our most basic needs and important needs are the physiological needs and needs for safety. It then goes on to psychological needs, like a sense of belongingness and esteem. And then finally, at the very tippy top of the pyramid, we have self-fulfillment needs, so things like self-actualization. And what's interesting about Hades is that it very much emulates the hierarchy of needs, which would make sense, right? Because the first thing we're going to want to care about, first and foremost, is just surviving. So the first thing that we're able to get, and the easiest thing we're able to get, is power through the Mirror of Night, right? So in the Mirror of Night, you're offered the ability to buff your character by spending darkness. And darkness, as we spoke about in the first episode in Hades, is accrued simply by playing the game. You don't have to be good. You don't have to master any kind of new weaponry. You just have to play the game and you'll earn darkness. And that will give you that basic need on the hierarchy of success. But what's also interesting then is as you progress and you start to fulfill that need, what's the second need? As we spoke about, the second need is the psychological needs, which is the need for belongingness and love. And this is arguably where Hades' NPCs come in because they sort of fulfill that gap. But they're placed quite cleverly in the sense that they're not essential. Interacting with NPCs is not essential to fulfilling that initial need. So I think there's something quite interesting there where there's definitely sort of an alignment here between the design of Hades and fundamental human psychology. So yeah, slow burn investment in characters I think is a major part of what makes Hades quite so powerful. And as you go, you begin to bond more and more with the case. It sort of sneaks up on you, really. And then before you know it, you're sort of doing things to progress the relationships. What's also cool is the fact that when you do progress a relationship fully, when you fill up all those hearts entirely, as you'd expect, the game does give you something back. It's not a huge something, but it is a little something, which is these little sticker guys that you can see here. So these are keepsakes. So these are what you earn by progressing your relationships with the different NPCs in the game, and they're earned from different NPCs throughout. But when you fully advance a relationship to its maximum level, you're given, first and foremost, a sort of highly celebratory cutscene. Well, not even a cutscene, more of just a celebratory moment where you get some UI on the screen that celebrates the fact that you did the thing, which is very feel-good. But you also get these little sort of cute stickers that are applied to the top right. So again, you're almost given... this is quite a common sort of concept, especially in mobile gaming, where there's the sticker book system or the sticker book dynamic, where you're having to fill a sticker book, a quote-unquote sticker book, metaphorically speaking, or sometimes literally with stickers just for completing or getting them all. You got to collect them all, so it's another way of adding progression into the game. But it's quite light, but at least offers something for engaging with that, for that progression. The second thing that I think Hades does quite well on a high level, so this is the first thing, which is slow burn character investment. The second thing that I think we can hone in on is lots of room and motivation for what's called intrinsic progression. So we've talked about intrinsic progression and extrinsic progression in previous episodes, but just to recap, intrinsic progression relates to the player leveling up personally. So in games like Apex or Overwatch, these are prime examples where the player can actually see and feel themselves getting better at the game, which is something that on a human level, again, is a highly enjoyable experience. We like to feel ourselves getting better at something. It is often a real compelling reason to come back to a game because it almost condenses down that mastery cycle into a much shorter time frame than maybe a real-life activity. I say real life, something like DIY, for example, maybe would take. And is arguably less damaging to your household, which is good. So intrinsic progression is this, and then extrinsic progression is where you're earning rewards from in the game. So it's a number going up, it's a currency that you're collecting, it's something to tell you that you're advancing. So this is the difference. But what Hades really focuses on, and I think is super important in any kind of solo PvE experience, is lots of room for intrinsic progression without necessarily making the game complicated. It keeps the game very simple by keeping the controls very simple and not relying on complex button combos or anything like that. Instead, it offers a couple of different moves and then leans on its boon variety and its build variety through keepsakes and through boons and through aspects, which we're going to look at a bit more in a second, to create that variety and create some sort of mastery and build structure. So there's definitely some important things to kind of hone in on there. There's also, as I say, the aspects. So each weapon, first and foremost, every weapon is what you'd call orthogonal. So they all operate in very distinct and different ways and offer very distinct advantages and gameplay styles. For example, just to give one prime sort of comparison example, here you have on the far left, you have the sword, which is the sort of basic all-rounder weapon. Sorry, Scaly. And then on the far right, you've got the... this guy, I always forget what the name of the thing is.
Hexagriff.
Thank you, Zachary. It's perfectly timed. I planned that. So yeah, this guy, this weapon is a firearm essentially. So this gives you a real clear sense of the difference, the vast difference in terms of how these weapons operate. But the benefit of that from a design level is that there's an awful lot of different gameplay styles to master. So this is what you call a skill ceiling. Your skill ceiling is raised even higher because there's different weapons to go off and get better with. You've then got what's called darkness-imbued weapons. So you see this guy here, for example, is glowing purple, and if we walk up to it, it says you're equipped for plus 20% darkness. So not only does Hades offer a bunch of different orthogonal weapons, but it also offers players distinct reasons to go off and pick different weapons and try and get better with them, because here we have a very clear gameplay incentive, which is that we get more darkness just for using this weapon and trying it out and getting better with it. So quite clever. And finally, we have the aspects. So we're going to take a weapon and open it up. So we looked a little bit at this before, and we're going to go into this in a bit more detail now. So aspects of weapons, we talked before about how Hades offers two different types of progression, particularly in regards to its weaponry. So it offers vertical progression, where you're earning darkness to increase your power vertically, so numbers are going up. It also offers horizontal progression. So horizontal progression is where your options, your tools are progressing or expanding. So you've got more ways of dealing with the same problem essentially. So another good example of horizontal progression would be Hearthstone. Hearthstone is all about horizontal progression, where you're earning new and more cards rather than buffing the cards that you already have. So here we have different aspects that allow the weapon to function in different ways. Not only does this offer more horizontal progression and in turn more room for mastery, but it also completely changes how you can create builds in the game. So you're adding even more variety to the possible builds that you can create in a run by offering this dynamic. And then lastly, at the very bottom, you have what are called hidden aspects. They're not so hidden now because we've actually gone ahead, or I say my partner has gone ahead and unlocked them all because they're just so damn good at Hades. I've seen it. It's a miracle. You're going to watch it in a second. But with hidden aspects, these are usually locked off. You don't see what they are, what they offer. You see no details whatsoever. Which in and of itself is quite compelling, because mystery on a high level, again, is a very strong, compelling motivator. It's often what's used in horror to keep audiences engaged with a horror movie. You want to understand what's going on and why it's going on, so you're willing to sort of sit through the horrible bits to find the answers that you're looking to find out. So mystery is a very strong, compelling force. But hidden aspects are quite interesting in the sense that they offer double-edged benefits. So you might expect when unlocking a hidden aspect for the first time that it would be the best, because it's something that takes a long time to upgrade, and if anyone's interested, the way you unlock them is by finishing the game with a weapon and then speaking to a certain character that's associated with that weapon, which at some point you end up doing, and then you unlock the hidden aspect of that weapon. But the interesting part is, like I say, you would expect maybe this thing to be the most powerful option available, right? It's hidden, it's the last one you get. Supergiant didn't go down that road and instead opted for these double-edged approaches, and maybe there's a couple of reasons for that. First and foremost, if it was the most powerful option available to you, it would essentially nullify all previous aspects that were made available to you. So from a developer standpoint, it isn't ideal because you're almost making a lot of your content redundant. it becomes unimportant because one of those options is clearly the most important thing available. And the second main reason is because by this point, presumably, if you've taken the time to unlock a weapon, odds are you're probably pretty good at the game by then. So by offering a double-edged weapon, you're offering even more mastery room to the game as a result. Rather than offering them a very powerful option, you're raising the skill ceiling even higher by offering them this option. What's also quite telling is the fact that they're their most visually embellished options. So not only are they quite an interesting candidate from a gameplay option, but they're designed to look very appealing visually. So it's almost even more of a sort of a temptation to pick it and to try and get better with it because it just looks cool, which is sometimes all it takes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, I think, just crack on with a run. But before that, we're going to have a look at one more thing, and then we're going to talk about some other high-level sort of strengths of Hades, which is this. So this is the Pact of Punishment, which is also known as the heat system in Hades. So the heat system is awarded for completing the game for the first time. And the doorway changes to have this sort of scroll hanging over the top. For anyone who's played Halo, you'll be kind of familiar with the system. It's sort of like Skulls from Halo. So the idea is that you can pick a bunch of different sort of skulls, essentially, like challenges or weight conditions is what they're called in the game, to make the game more challenging. And as you increase the challenge, you're then in turn offered potential new rewards as a result. So you can see here, for example, that right now, let's just try and increase this for a second. Oh, no, we need to lower this a little bit, actually. Let's lower this guy down a little bit more. Okay, cool. So now I can show how this works. So on heat level 1, you can see here that bounties are offered for heat level 1. So by completing the game with heat level 1, I can win by beating the first boss. This icon you can see in bounties, I can win blood. Then for the second boss, diamonds. For the third boss, ambrosia. And then for the fourth and final boss, more blood. If I then increase the heat to the next level, oops, by pressing the wrong button. So now there's a new set of bounties available. So the long and short of it is that for each heat level, there's a new set of bounties and rewards to be earned. So there's quite a lot to unpack here, as you might expect, because there's quite a lot going on at the same time. So the benefits of this versus maybe something like a flat difficulty scale-up is twofold, really. The two main kind of things that I would call out is that it gives players another opportunity to feel smart. There are clearly some sort of like combinations of modifier that would be disastrous together, so it sort of offers the player a chance to feel smart by picking ones that maybe they feel are getting them the best rewards for the least possible resistance. We sort of can look back to a quote that Sid Meier, we mentioned in the last episode on Omno from Sid Meier, is that gamers like to feel, well, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but gamers like to feel impressed with what they're doing. Which again, like I say, is a quote from Sid Meier, who I think knows a thing or two about game design. So there's definitely something to bear in mind there when it comes to offering a system like this. So yeah, I think there's a benefit there in terms of offering a degree of choice versus, like I say, a flat scale-up of difficulty. And also, not all players are made the same, right? Like some players are going to like a certain type of challenge versus others. So for some players, they might want challenge to involve faster enemies, whereas others might want to see more mechanics in the game. Speaking of which, this is less of like a deconstruction and more just a call-out, but it's a particularly cool call-out, I think. One of these conditions is extreme measures. So let's just read the tooltip here. Each Underworld region's bosses gain new techniques, 1 region per rank. So what that essentially means is that bosses have extra moves and combat abilities that you typically don't see unless you raise this value and allow them to have these extra abilities. So you can go through the entire game and not get the full experience of the boss unless you engage with this mechanic, which is quite interesting in a sense because you're almost rewarding gameplay with more gameplay, which from a developer standpoint is great, right? Because you're you're encouraging engagement by rewarding more engagement. So you almost create a sort of like a, whatever the nice version is of a vicious loop, that's what this is. So it's quite a clever way of sort of offering players to stay engaged, but also offering more content as a result. So yeah, like I say, you might also be wondering why Supergiant has sort of like made this work in a way that, so let's just check this out, for example. If we keep increasing this, it says here, heat gauge exceeded, choose fewer conditions. So what this means is that we can actually just go ahead and keep increasing this. What this means is that the game is trying to tell us there is no point in having the heat level at 6. Currently, with this weapon, we are trying to complete heat level 2. So in other words, we can go ahead and, I think we can go ahead and do this with heat level 6, but we'll not get any extra rewards as a result. So you can see here again, looking at the bounties, for the first and second reward, we've already got those. When we hit that third boss, if we beat that third boss, we will only get the rewards for the heat level 2. We'll not get it for levels 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the question is, well, why? Why would Supergiant do that? Like, if I want to go ahead and just do all these 4 levels, extra 4 levels to get those extra rewards, then why wouldn't I do that? And the main reason really is that, long story short, it would break the system. Players could essentially gamify the system. Let's say, for example, that we didn't own any Titan blood from the first level there, or even let's say we did. Let's just go ahead and crank this up entirely, right? So level whatever 15, right? This would mean that for any heat level we don't currently have Titan blood, which is used to upgrade weaponry in the game, if we were just to beat that first boss, we would get a ton of Titan blood, which would basically make all subsequent heat levels far easier and less impactful. So it sort of breaks the system. So instead, what they've done is stagger the system so you can't stack rewards. So that's the real reason why they. Well, I would think that's the reason why they've done that.
Stick around on my account, boy.
And also, coming back around to progression in Hades, progression is also offered with heat. So heat isn't just a thing that you can use to gain your rewards, but also by completing a dungeon with a certain amount of heat, you unlock something. I would love to tell you what this is. I personally still don't have an idea. Like I say, this is my partner's account. They've been playing this for a long time now, and we still don't know what these things under these cloaks are. But the fact that even at this late stage in the game, there are still more things to uncover and unlock really speaks to the degrees to which Supergiant went to offer as much progression in the game as possible. Which, like we say, is possibly because of the fact that it's a roguelike genre game where you're losing progress constantly, so there are perpetually things to chase to almost sort of distract you from the fact that you're losing progress repeatedly. So we're going to crack on now. I'm going to hand the controller over to my partner. I'm not even going to try and attempt a game run at this level. I'm just not there yet, folks. I'm not going to lie. And I'm going to be chatting away to you while we play. And we're going to be calling out a few other bits and pieces at the same time. Some really serious thought going in here. Strategy in action. Strategy live.
Don't you dare look at me like that, boy, with your mismatched eyes. You save it for yourself. You have a mirror in your chambers, don't you?
I have both my parents' eyes.
Something else I'd like to talk about a little bit as well with you is... One sec.
Stronger, noble cousin, and the blessing.
It's the feel of combat itself in Hades. So Hades, if anyone's played Hades, if you yourself have played Hades, is a very distinct experience. We might need to turn the volume down a little bit, is the only thing. I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. There we go. So yeah, the game feel in Hades is very distinct, where it's quite a fast, frenetic experience, and the question might be, well, why? Why is it that Hades offers the kind of experience and gameplay feel that it does versus something potentially alternate, right? Something that would still be quite punishing, but different. So, for example, Dark Souls. Why is Hades not a slower-paced experience where enemies hit hard, but you also kind of hit hard and you die repeatedly? Surely that would work just as well. And for all intents and purposes, that could be a very interesting game. And if it exists, then somebody can please tell me, either now or at least via a message. But if I had to hazard a guess as to why Hades feels the way it feels, there's a couple of important reasons as to maybe why that is. In a game like Dark Souls, it's obviously a very methodical experience where you're treading through the world carefully to stay alive. Which means that your progress is slow, or slower, but you're gradually seeing more and more new environments and new places as a result. So you don't get to burn through the content because you're having to be slow because you're trying to stay alive, and if you go too fast, you run into danger and you end up dying, losing all your stuff. So you're sort of encouraged to be more methodical. If that were the case in Hades, you'd have a couple of knock-on effects as a result. Namely, that you'd be spending a lot more time, but making far less progress. In Hades, if you were to go from start to finish and not die, is like 30 minutes. It's really not very long at all. So the fact is that you tend to make a lot of progress in Hades during a run, and then can remake that progress really quite quickly. If that kind of makes sense. Like, you're doing it over and over again, right? It's sort of like in Dark Souls, it's methodical, where you're treading carefully to stay alive. Here, you're actually staying on the move to stay alive, which keeps you very visually engaged. And in Dark Souls, like I say, you're seeing new sights more often too. So it also helps keep the game runs brief to avoid more intense loss aversion when, you've made strong progress that didn't take like 2 hours to make. So from an engagement standpoint and a sense of progression standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to offer a more fast, frenetic, responsive experience as opposed to something equally punishing, but on the opposite end of the field spectrum. Or this field spectrum, at any rate. So looking back around to the sort of high-level areas of the game that I would argue make Hades as compelling and has helped it be as successful as it obviously has been. We've talked about slow burn investment in the characters. We've talked about lots of room for intrinsic and motivation for intrinsic progression. They also ensure a vast amount of gameplay variety. So roguelites boast inherent advantages when it comes to gameplay variety because each game run is different in terms of your character's build and the environments and types of threat that they encounter. Biomes support different kinds of environmental hazard. You've also got darkness-imbued weapons. You've also got boss variants. I'm hoping we'll come to a boss at some point in the next sort of 5 minutes or so to give you a sense of what we're talking about. But each boss in Hades offers what are called variants. So the first boss that you encounter can be presented to the player in one of, I think, 3 different ways, where each version has different attacks and different abilities. But what's really cool is that while there are visual differences, these visual differences are more sort of skin replacements than complete model changes, which from a development standpoint is a very smart move, right? Because it cuts down on development costs and development time, where you're having to make whole new models and animation sets and VFX to go with these different boss variants. Instead, you're simply changing a skin, you're changing some colors to tell players very clearly this is a boss variant, it's not the same one you fought before, but it's supporting new gameplay as a result, which keeps the gameplay fresh. Plus the fact that you're probably rocking a totally different build the last time you did when you fought them before. So again, it's a very different experience each and every single time. So you're not playing the same game over and over and over. You also have what we talked about in the first episode of Hades, but we're going to touch on it again because I think it's an important thing to reiterate, is the figure of 8 game loop. So the way that I would put it is that in Hades, death is more of an opportunity rather than a reset. And what I mean by that is that Hades almost offers sort of 2 core game loops that feed into each other. So the initial core game loop is what you're seeing right now, which is the core combat. And then when you die, it's an opportunity to go back to the hub world and progress more with the characters, to progress more with your darkness, to imbue weapons, all of which taps back into the, like I say, this initial core loop, which is the combat, which creates, like I say, a figure of 8 experience. So in other roguelites, maybe you played before, you're usually running through the game, having a run, you die, and you go right back to the beginning, and you start right back from there, and that's all there is to it. So it's almost a single loop, which is not something that I would say Hades offers and is also one of its core strengths. Coming back to game feel for a second as well, like this is very much conjecture on my part. Game design, I would say, is a lot like movies in the sense that oftentimes they're influenced by the world around them at the time of their development. You know, so for example, monster movies are reputedly. I'm going to make a point. I promise I'll get back around to the point I want to make. Monster movies are usually kind of renowned to grow in popularity during harder times in our society because they're sort of major breaks from reality where there's nothing really difficult to understand. It's just a sort of free and open and simple romp that's purely there for entertainment. Okay, we can actually see here, just to pause on that thought for a second before we go any further with the dialogue, you can see here there's actually two variants of this boss here in the same place. So on the left you've got Megara, I never can pronounce the name, but the difference is there that obviously she's wearing the purple sash, and then on the right you have the variant and one of her sisters, and again, as we talked about in the first episode of Hades, everything is reinforced with the narrative of Greek mythology. So there's a very strong reference to the narrative of Greek mythology at all times to help inform the kind of bosses you fight and the weapons you get and the reasoning for motivations of different characters. Yeah, so on the right you've got this other variant which is wearing the green sash. So just by that one simple change of color, you've got enough there to tell a player this is a different boss, but they offer totally different fighting moves. So let's just crack on and see what happens with this boss fight.
There's no escape from here, and I like to repeatedly show him he's wrong.
Sounds like you found yourself a steady line of work. Most check.
But yeah, so to circle back around to what we were talking about before, if you're still with me, we were talking about monster movies before, and how these are going to relate to the combat of Hades. I think that Hades is a very responsive game. It's very quick and very action-packed, and like we say, very fluid. And if we look at sort of like services that are offered today, services tend to kind of lean in that direction also, where we want things faster, we want things more immediately. So again, like I say, pure conjecture, but I do wonder if the reason why Hades' combat feel is so compelling is because it taps into that need that seems to be quite prevalent in today's society, where we want things to be more immediate and more sort of like instantaneous. And it may be there's some sort of satisfaction to be found there in Hades' combat because of this. So to recap all those high-level points that we've covered, slow burn investment in its characters, lots of room for and motivation for intrinsic progression, ensuring gameplay variety in a number of different ways, the figure-of-8 game loop to avoid loss aversion, game feel, and lots of ways to progress are all, I think, major parts of what make Hades as strong as it is.
Off to Asphodel. Let's go up.
And are things to consider when you're designing your own games.
Check.
It's definitely things I consider when designing mine.
Look at all that coin.
Even here, for example, so in the first biome we saw that, it was a fairly straightforward biome with a couple of traps here and there. And again, the narrative of Greek mythology is used to reinforce even the biomes of the game. But in this biome, because it's a different biome, it affords new challenges. So unlike before, where we had quite small enclosed spaces, which also lead for sort of snappier encounters and quicker encounters to get you through that first environment a little bit faster, perhaps, and help the player feel like they're making a bit more progress. And this one is slightly more open, but also you've got these sort of rivers of lava running through it, so there's something else for the player to have to consider in this particular biome. So a new challenge. we've spoken before in previous episodes, especially on Returnal with GDL, on the importance of choice in games. Again, to quote Sid Meier, a game is a series of meaningful decisions or interesting choices. I'm going to have to Google it in a second. But here you've got, for example, this chest that we just engaged with was a totally optional thing we didn't have to engage with, where if you feel like you're skilled up enough on an intrinsic progression level, you can choose to interact with that chest and earn more rewards as a result. A game is a series of interesting choices. So I was right, I got it. I think I got it. Another interesting variant in Hades are armored enemies. So we touched on them very lightly last time. Armored enemies are these guys that have yellow bands across their health bar. This guy would just strip his armor right down. And again, it's just another way of offering, from a developmental standpoint, a cheap variant, developmentally cheap variant of an enemy, but very much changes the feel and experience of a combat encounter. It's a whole different type of problem for players to deal with. Especially considering the rules around how flinching works in Hades, which are very clean cuts, intentionally so with the use of armor. So when an enemy is not armored, in other words, when its health bar is just red, any attacks that you do to that enemy will attack interrupt them. They sort of end up being attack interrupted, where they can't really do anything as long as you're hitting them. They just stay locked. Here, for example, if we just keep hitting him, there's nothing he can do, right? If all enemies were like this, it would certainly reduce the challenge of the game. But with armored enemies, they're somewhat different, where if you hit them, they completely ignore attack cancelling and can keep doing whatever it is that they're doing in the first place. So not only does it offer a very clear combat rule, which is important, especially in a game as fast-paced as this, but it introduces a nice level of challenge, an additional layer of much-needed challenge, in a arguably relatively cheap developmental way. Can I just say now that nobody likes this fight, okay? No one likes this fight. Who likes being turned to stone? Immobility? Ugh. So normally in GDL we do take the full hour to chat through things. This is a part 2, so I reckon that we'll be cutting it a little bit shorter this time around, as we've chatted through quite a lot, and I've talked very fast for a lot of it, so there's a lot to digest most likely. And if you have kind of like brushed over anything because of the rate at which I'm talking, which I could probably do better with, and it's definitely something I'm going to work on. But if you have kind of like missed out on a few bits and pieces, do feel free to check out the VOD, which will be available on my Twitch channel, and after that it will be available on the YouTube channel as well to check out whenever you like. And as always, if you've enjoyed the content, if you found it interesting and useful, do please follow the channel. It's hugely appreciated. Any support is hugely appreciated. You can also check out my Twitter, which is @AH Topalian, which I keep very updated with lots of game-related news and articles, or design-related articles, or psychology-related articles. So do check that out as well. And you can also check out older videos that we've checked out of previous games like The Ascent and Returnal on the YouTube channel, which is, again, Game Design Live.
Once took a skinny little chap down to the underworld, got the business end of a sharp spear, he did.
Something's amiss. I have returned.
Another great example here of variety in the game, where every so often you'll meet Thanatos, I think the name is,
I'll also do that.
where he essentially offers you a challenge to try and earn more kills than he does during a fight. And again, it's just another nice way of offering gameplay variety during a run. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. it's also quite a good time to sort of announce a somewhat new sort of new structure that I'll be adopting in the upcoming episodes of GDL next week. So usually what I do is that I tend to play a game in advance a little bit and then prepare some notes and sort of topics that I want to touch on with you guys to chat through. What I'm thinking of doing for next week is one episode every week. I'll be doing exactly that, which is a slightly more in-depth, deep dive into the game and its mechanics and design decisions, with some sort of notes pre-prepared to make sure that I'm giving you the best possible content I can be giving you. The second episode every week, I'll be doing a blind playthrough. So it'll be a game that I haven't played before. We'll be playing it together for the first time, and I'll just be calling things out as and when I see them. So like I say, Monday we'll be having a deep dive design deconstruction episode, and then on Wednesday, next Wednesday, same time, same place, 9 to 10 p.m. BST, we'll be doing blind Let's Plays together. And as always, if there are any games that you'd like to check out, please do feel free to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to accommodate like certain requests. So yeah, like I say, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we've talked about a bunch of different things. We've talked about the hierarchy of needs, we've talked about loss aversion, we've talked about the importance of the figure of 8 game loop in Hades, which avoids things like loss aversion. We've talked about game feel and the rationale, the possible rationale behind Hades' game feel and why it does combat the way that it does it. We've talked about the heat system and how the heat system offers what it offers. We're not going to say the whole thing over and over again, but if you're interested and didn't catch the whole thing, like I say, do feel free to check out the pod. And I think we're going to call it there. That's a solid 45 minutes of design deconstruction goodness. This has been Game Design Live with the second episode on Hades. Tune in to Game Design Live next Monday, like I say, 9 to 10 p.m. BST, where we're going to be looking together at Doom Eternal is going to be the next thing we're going to be looking at. So if you're interested in Doom, do please check GDL out next week. As I say, Monday, we'll be playing a bit of Doom together. One episode only, and we're breaking down what's called push-forward combat in the game, which is something that is highly praised in the experience, and we're going to be delving into a little bit and talking about how push-forward combat in Doom came to be, and how it works, and why it works as well as it works. So again, thank you very much for coming along. It's a pleasure as always. Have a great night, and I will see you hopefully very soon. Thank you.